Hello, welcome back to the Piping Pastor. Today we'll be discussing prophecy from the margins, and we'll be taking a look at the best poetry of 1994. Well, today I am smoking Peterson Elizabethan mixture, and I am smoking it out of my J.W. Boswell pipe. I mentioned once before when I was wearing this sweater that there was a rather amusing story about it related to stubbornness that I would share at a different time. So, since I'm wearing it again in a rather casual outfit with my button-down barrel cuff Oxford, it was a casual day today. I thought I would share the story. We were taking a holiday to Portugal, and around that time of year, it was meant to be warmish. It wasn't exactly summertime in Portugal. I believe this was a winter holiday, but the weather was meant to be much warmer than where we were coming from in the north of Scotland. So I thought I would just pack uh, my button-down cloth Oxfords and shirts of this nature and some khaki pants and so forth, and I would be fine. My wife and daughters packed a variety of clothes set for different temperatures. So they had their shorts and they also had sweaters. And I thought, I don't want to pack two different seasons of clothing for one holiday of about a week. I'll just go with long sleeve shirts, long pants, and shoes, and I'll be fine in the middle. Well, my wife advised me against it, and I stubbornly refused and said, no, there's no sense in me packing both my sweaters and my coats and shorts, and I'm just not going to deal with all that. It's just too much to deal with. Never mind. So I went in just my long sleeve shirts. And of course, it took a cold turn about day 2. And I was just really cold walking around. And so by day 3, I was like, okay, I just got to bite the bullet and just and buy a cardigan. Um, and as it happens, we're in this little shopping area. And as you may imagine, along the Algarve in Portugal, it's not a whole lot of sweater shops. So, but there was one place that was selling sweaters and cardigans, and it was a Scottish business. They imported Scottish wool and made these sweaters. Keep in mind, we were living in Scotland at the time and had taken a holiday to Portugal. So I ended up paying about twice the amount for this as I would have done 1 week prior because it was a Scottish wool sweater made by a Scottish sweater maker. So, so good lesson for that. Stubbornness can cost you. Today, I wanted to talk about prophecy from the margins for a couple of reasons. First, this book I mentioned, the best poetry of 1994, best American poetry of 1994. I bought this book at a bookseller here in town because the title, it grabbed me. I graduated in 1994. And I thought, my goodness, well, that's interesting. I had really no interest in poetry at the time. And so I thought, well, maybe I should check that out and see who was rated as the best poets of my era, my youth. And as I read through it, I became increasingly, first of all, disappointed and then disillusioned and almost to the point of being angry at the quality and the subject matter of the poetry of that time. It was not pleasant. Um, I have a habit of marking in anthologies particular poems that I find interesting or poignant or ones that I might speak about here on the channel. And as you can see, there are 2 that are marked in this book. I read through the entire thing a couple of times. I thought the first time I read through it, I may have been in a, maybe just a bad mood, and I just wasn't getting it. But no, I read through it the second time and I had the same opinion. And it put me in mind of something that was a subject matter of an article written by one of my classmates in high school. was one of those articles you write for the yearbook. Nothing got published or anything of that nature. But in this article, he was discussing the fact that he was meant to go around and speak to all the graduating seniors about what we had accomplished, what we thought we had done, what kind of impact we had made on the world. And by and large, the opinions that he garnered were that we had done nothing, uh, that people just didn't know what we had done, weren't sure about any kind of impact we had had, and couldn't really point to anything significant. Didn't do anything bad, right? We just kind of floated through, and rather mediocre, blase kind of existence. And I've come to understand that in the many years since then, that has kind of characterized my generation, that we're uh, sideliners, that we just kind of sit and watch the world go by and don't really get involved. You can't really characterize my generation by any radical activism or any radical detriment to the environment, or just really nothing on either side, going either direction. And this book of poetry, I think, exemplifies that. The majority of poems in this book are not about the poet trying to interpret reality or interpret humanity or offer a view of metaphysical reality or truth or anything that could have any kind of a major impact or explicative effect. Nothing. I mean, most of the poems of this book, as I say, I only marked two that I thought were um, in any way useful. The rest of them are simply about the poet themselves. They're just talking about themselves, about something they've gone through or something they've experienced, or how life was hard on them individually, these really singular experiences, and they're just working themselves out. It's almost like they're having a conversation with themselves about themselves. And I found it really disheartening. But that is to say, not all was a waste, because there is a rather lovely poem in here which I thought fit our topic very well for today. And uh, this is called Full of Rain, the word. And I'm going to go through the whole thing here, which I normally don't do. But I think that the poem in its entirety has a lot to say. So this is by Ramola Dharmaraj. Full of rain, the word is coming now, out of the south, out of the flat white grain of rice that sleeps still inside the husk, in Bellary that waits for a woman's hand, for the winnowing and whisper of fallen stalk. The word is coming now, out of the north, out of the faint, the murmuring sounds of stone that makes to itself and watches the clothes beaten on its crude and eaten back at the Krishna and the Godavari. Out of the wooden plow dragged out of the east, across the hardened field by buffalo in Bengal, Orissa, out of the west, by cows stretched thin around the ribs in Gujarat, Maharashtra, out of the tin the village beggar holds, out of her eyes grown heavy and dull, dull with the heavy abrasion of desire, out of the mud the buffaloes wallow in, out of the mud that builds the hut and breaks in flood, out of the weeping mud, the word. It sleeps like a fallen god in the flat dung cakes the women smear on the brick walls, washed white with lime. It burns in that burning of dung, opens fires and woods, spelling smoke in thick letters in the air. The word rushes at us with the whole alphabet of the monsoon in its wake. But such a distant whisper, such a shaved, whittled breath, who hear the word as it struggles, who will put their ear to the stones and grain snapped hard of the stinging stalk? Who will touch the swollen word and know what it says? Who will hear the voice of the poor as they speak? And I should point out that this poet is writing about experiences in India, of course, using all the geographical names and so forth. And um, so again, it's not necessarily about life in America, even though this poet uh, it has a lot to say. And perhaps That poet should be included in an anthology of the best poetry of 1994, not just the best American poetry, because it has a wonderful word about the word of the poor. All the great imagery there, the really specific uh, instances of how the poor in India live, and that they're groaning with this word. They're groaning to call out. There's this swollen word. It's this imagery of the poor having so much to say and to offer, but there's no one there to hear it. And it's a it's a sad thing, but it's a reality that the poor are not listened to, even though they have so much to say. And this fits into our theme of prophecy in the Bible, prophecy from the margins. Because if you look in Old Testament prophecy, it's not kings talking to kings, right? We have the wisdom literature and proverbs and so forth, the Prince's Mirror and so on. But in the prophetic works, it's the prophets speaking in, through, and about the poor, rebuking those in power. See, those who are in power, for lack of a better term, I guess you could say the 1%, they have less a tendency to listen, not only to those around them, but certainly less of a tendency to listen to God. I've also often talked to people about some of the missions work that we've done in various places around the world and so forth. And I always tell people the most difficult mission field, the most difficult people to reach are the wealthy and successful. If you go to a beggar on the streets of Hangzhou and tell them you have a word of hope, they're ready to listen, because in their situation, selling lotus blossoms from a cart to try to feed their family for that day, they need hope. They need something that tells them that there's something grander beyond. They crave it. They have a great deal to share, a great deal of wisdom, but there's also a great need there, just physical needs. If you go to a person who drives a $130,000 car and has 5 or 6 homes and tell them you have a word of hope, they look around at their possessions and say, "I have the hope. What need have I of you and your God and all that silliness, right? I own a spaceship." Those people are the most difficult ones to reach. That's why again and again in the Old Testament you see God trying to reach out to them, attempting to offer them a word. And oftentimes it's about how they interact with and how they treat the poor of their societies, how they take care of those who are financially destitute. We see examples in the Old Testament, Boaz, for an example, allowing the poor to go back and glean behind, and there's of course rules in the Old Testament about not gleaning your fields twice, about leaving those the leftovers in the field after the harvest for those who can't afford to feed themselves. And all of that creates this imagery of the powerful who are in control, who need to take care of those that can't take care of themselves, and that's what your power and your wealth should be for. But the message I think that gets lost there is the message that's in this poem, especially, and that is the poor have a word to share. The poor have prophecy. There's a reason that God spoke through Hosea, right? There's a reason that God spoke through these prophets who lived in and amongst those on the margins, because there is wisdom there. We assume because they have no financial success and no possessions that what can they offer us, right? But there is wisdom in there. There is a word that is groaning to be heard, and we ignore it to our detriment. Well, that is all we have for today. So until next time, enjoy your week, and as always, happy reading.